The relentless sun beat down on Jedediah Jed Stone's ranch, baking the earth into a cracked, dusty expanse. Each gust of wind carried the fine grit across the endless plains, a constant reminder of the desolation that had settled in his heart. It had been months since the coughs had quieted, since the last whispered goodbyes had faded into the vast silence. His wife Sarah and their boy Thomas were gone, victims of the frontier's unforgiving illnesses. Jed moved through his days, like a ghost, his calloused hands performing tasks mechanically, his eyes distant, seeing only the phantom outlines of the laughter and music that once filled his home. The ranch, once a vibrant hub of life, was now an empty shell, echoing with the void of his loss. One sweltering afternoon, as Jed rode his aging mare across the outermost reaches of his property, his gaze fell upon an anomaly in the shimmering heat haze. A dark, unnatural shape jutted from the parched earth, incongruous amidst the sparse sagebrush and tumbleweeds. As he drew closer, the shape resolved into something utterly bizarre, an upright piano, its dark wood warped and splintered by the elements, abandoned in the middle of nowhere. It stood like a forgotten monument to a lost civilization, a stark contrast to the rugged wilderness. A strange sense of unease settled over him, mingling with a flicker of morbid curiosity. Dismounting, Jed approached the peculiar find, the only sound the creak of his saddle leather and the distant caw of a crow. He circled the derelict instrument, its keys a jumble of yellows and browns, many missing entirely. Then a faint sound reached his ears, a muffled, almost imperceptible whimper. It was human. Yet's heart gave a jolt, a sensation he hadn't felt in months. He fumbled with the heavy swollen lid, prying it open with a grunt of effort. Inside, curled in a tiny fetal ball, was a young girl no older than 10, her eyes wide with terror, rimmed with the streaks of dried tears. Her small frame trembled, dust clinging to her tattered dress dot as he helped her out. His gaze fell upon a stark, disturbing message crudely carved into the back of the piano. She was too loud. The words were an icy chill down his spine, hinting at a cruelty Jed couldn't yet comprehend. Who would do this? Who was this child, and what unspeakable events had led her to be trapped inside a broken musical instrument in the desolate wilderness? A wave of protective instinct, dormant for so long, surged within him. He scooped the small, trembling figure into his arms, a silent promise forming in his mind. He would take her back to his empty home, a place he never thought he'd share again, and somehow find answers in the vast, unforgiving landscape of the American West out the arrival of the girl, whom Jed, with no other name to call her, began to refer to as Sarah, slowly chipped away at the thick shell of his solitary existence. The ranch house, once filled with the profound silence of grief, now held the quiet stirrings of a new, fragile presence. Sarah was a creature of shadows and whispers. She spoke little, her voice a reedy whisper when it came at all, and her large, haunted eyes seemed to hold the weight of unspeakable terrors. Nightmares frequently plagued her, waking Jed to the sound of her small, pained cries echoing through the thin walls, a heartbreaking reminder of his own unresolved grief. He felt a profound sense of helplessness, unsure how to mend a spirit. So deeply fractured seeking guidance, Jed rode to the nearest neighboring ranch, a modest homestead belonging to Martha, a woman of quiet strength and deep wisdom. Martha, who had known her own share of loss in this harsh land, listened patiently as Jed recounted the bizarre discovery. Her weathered face softened with concern as she looked at Sarah, her eyes reflecting understanding and empathy. Martha gently suggested that Sarah's silence and fear were symptoms of profound trauma, and perhaps a connection to music, indicated by the piano, might be a pathway to healing. She spoke of how art, even in its simplest forms, could unlock unspoken emotions and provide an outlet for pain. Inspired by Martha's words, Jed tried to salvage the broken piano, but its internal mechanisms were too far gone, a skeletal mess of snapped wires and splintered wood. Yet, even without a functioning instrument, Sarah's innate connection to rhythm and sound became apparent. She would tap out intricate patterns on the wooden table, hum forgotten melodies under her breath, and even absent-mindedly drum her fingers on the dusty window pane, each beat carrying a faint, haunting tune. Her passion was undeniable, a vibrant spark trying to ignite in the depths of her trauma. It became clear that music wasn't just a hobby for Sarah. It was an essential part of her very being, a language she spoke before she spoke words. News of the strange girl and the abandoned piano inevitably trickled into Harmony Creek, the nearest small town, a cluster of wooden buildings clinging to existence amidst the vast plains. The townsfolk, a mix of hardened pioneers and cautious settlers, were quick to gossip and quicker to judge. Whispers followed Jed and Sarah whenever they ventured into town for supplies. Some eyed Sarah with suspicion, seeing her as an omen of bad luck, a disruption to their tightly knit, self-preserving community. Others, more maliciously, speculated about her origins, their imaginations twisting the unsettling discovery into dark tales of hidden secrets and unsavory connections. The quiet sanctuary Jed had hoped to provide for Sarah was slowly becoming a stage for unwanted attention and mounting tension. As days turned into weeks, a fragile bond formed between Jed and Sarah, woven from shared silence, quiet understanding, and the unspoken language of compassion. Jed, initially driven by a sense of duty, now found his hardened heart softening, sensing that Sarah's well-being was inextricably linked to his own healing. He saw how the absence of a proper instrument gnawed at her, how her hands yearned for keys that weren't broken. Her rhythms on the table, while expressive, were merely echoes of the symphony yearning to be set free. It became clear that for Sarah to truly begin to heal, she needed to connect with her deepest passion, music. Jed knew he had to find a way, even if it meant venturing into the skepticism of the outside world. With a determined resolve, Jed embarked on a journey to Harmony Creek, not just for supplies, but with a specific purpose, to find someone who could either fix the piano or, at the very least, teach Sarah. The dusty main street of Harmony Creek offered little hope until he stumbled upon a dilapidated building at the edge of town, its windows dark, a faded sign above the door hinting at a past life as a music hall. Inside, he found Samuel, a man whose face bore the etched lines of hardship and whose eyes held the weary resignation of a spirit long broken. Samuel, once a gifted saloon pianist, had retreated from music and from life after a personal tragedy, his talent buried under layers of grief and regret. Jed explained Sarah's plight, describing the girl's trauma and her desperate need for music. Samuel listened, his expression initially cold and unyielding, offering gruff dismissals. "Music brings nothing but pain," he muttered, turning away. Yet's quiet persistence, his unwavering belief in the power of music for Sarah, slowly began to chip away at Samuel's defenses. The ranchero spoke of the child's haunted eyes, the silent pleas for a melody, and the unsettling words carved into the piano. The story of a young girl's plight, coupled with Yet's quiet conviction, eventually stirred something within the old musician, a faint flicker of the passion he thought long dead. Samuel, grudgingly, agreed to consider teaching the girl, a reluctant step towards an unexpected alliance. While Jed was away, a shadow began to creep closer to his isolated ranch. Silas, a slick and opportunistic merchant in Harmony Creek, had been quietly gathering information about Yet's mysterious found girl. Silas was a man whose pleasant demeanor barely concealed a predatory glint in his eyes and a history of unsavory dealings. He and his small, rough gang were suspicious of Sarah, convinced she held a secret, a piece of knowledge linked to events they wished to keep buried. Whispers about the girl's musical talent only intensified their curiosity, fearing it might be connected to something that could expose them. They began to ride out to Yet's property, their presence a palpable threat, their questions thinly veiled probes, creating an escalating tension that threatened to engulf the quiet ranch. Under Samuel's reluctant tutelage, Sarah blossomed. The old musician, despite his initial gruffness, possessed an innate talent for teaching, and Sarah, a prodigy in her own right, absorbed every lesson with astonishing speed. Samuel still possessed an old, dust-covered keyboard in the corner of his forgotten saloon, and on it, Sarah's small fingers found their voice. Each note she played seemed to banish a shadow, to release a fragment of her suppressed spirit. The joy in her eyes as she mastered a new scale or completed a simple tune was infectious, a vibrant counterpoint to the quiet melancholy that still clung to Jed. Her talent was not just a gift. It was a beacon, shining brightly in the desolate landscape, drawing attention from both friends and foes. But the light of Sarah's talent also cast long, dangerous shadows. Silas and his gang, increasingly agitated by the whispers of her musical prowess and her presence in the community, became bolder. They believed Sarah, with her unique gift and traumatic past, had witnessed or was somehow connected to something they desperately wanted to keep hidden. Their visits to Yet's ranch grew more frequent and more menacing, their questions sharper, their eyes more calculating. They saw her not as a traumatized child, but as a potential threat to their illicit schemes, a loose end that needed to be tied up. The air around Yet's ranch grew thick with unspoken threats, a storm brewing on the horizon. One afternoon, as Jed, Sarah, and Samuel were quietly working on the ranch, the storm broke. Silas and his gang, emboldened by their increasing desperation, rode onto the property, their intentions clear and hostile. They were no longer simply probing. They were there to silence Sarah, permanently. A fierce confrontation erupted. Dust-choked air filled with the sounds of shouting, the thud of fists, and the metallic glint of drawn weapons. Jed, fueled by a protective fury he hadn't known he still possessed, fought with the ferocity of a cornered lion. Shielding Sarah with his own body. In the chaos, Martha, who had been on her way to visit, arrived, her shotgun ready, her unexpected appearance turning the tide. Samuel, shedding his years of apathy, moved with a surprising agility, using his knowledge of the terrain to outmaneuver the attackers. Together, the unlikely trio fought back, repelling the gang, though not without scars. In the aftermath of the struggle, as Sarah trembled in Yet's arms, her small hand clutched a tarnished silver locket. Jed pried it open, revealing a tiny, intricately carved musical note, a silent clue to her past and the real reason for her suffering. The battle was won, but the war, Jed knew, was far from over. The locket in Sarah's hand was the final piece of the puzzle, a silent testament to a hidden tragedy. With this new clue, Jed and Samuel intensified their search for answers, delving deeper into the murky undercurrents of Harmony Creek. They discovered that Sarah's family had been a traveling troupe of musicians, renowned for their incredible talent, but also for their fierce independence and their refusal to bend to the will of powerful figures. Among these was a wealthy, ruthless rancher named Beaumont, who, with Silas as his enforcer, controlled much of the land and the livelihoods in the region. Beaumont had been captivated by Sarah's mother's singing, a voice as powerful and untamed as the prairie wind, and when she rejected his advances, his wounded pride turned to vengeful fury. They uncovered the horrifying truth. Beaumont had orchestrated the attack on Sarah's family, seeking to silence the voice that defied him and claim what he felt was his due. The words, "She was too loud," carved into the piano were not a confession of a crime of passion. but a cruel taunt, an attempt to paint Sarah's mother as a shrew who brought her fate upon herself, and to ensure Sarah, the only witness, was abandoned and forgotten. The chilling realization solidified Yet's resolve. He couldn't just protect Sarah. He had to seek justice for her and her family. With Martha's unwavering support and the quiet backing of a few honest townsfolk who had long suffered under Beaumont's tyranny, they prepared for a final confrontation. The showdown was not a grand shootout in the dusty street, but a tense public accusation in the town's saloon where Beaumont held court. Jed, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest, laid out the evidence, the locket, the piano, and Sarah's testimony whispered to Samuel, who then relayed her words, painting a vivid picture of Beaumont's depravity. Silas, cornered and desperate, tried to deny everything, but the weight of the truth, coupled with the growing murmurs of the townsfolk, began to turn against him. The community, finally seeing the monstrous truth behind Beaumont's polished facade, began to stir, their quiet fear slowly transforming into righteous anger. In a powerful moment, Sarah, her eyes no longer shadowed by fear but shining with a newfound courage, walked to the newly restored piano that Samuel, with the help of the town's carpenter, had painstakingly repaired. It was a gift from a community finally willing to embrace her. Her small fingers, no longer trembling, touched the keys, and a melody, hauntingly beautiful and powerfully resonant, filled the saloon. It was a song of sorrow, of loss, but also of resilience and hope, a testament to her family, a defiant whisper against the injustice, and a triumphant anthem of her survival. The music spoke louder than any words, echoing through the hearts of those present, solidifying Beaumont's downfall and marking a new beginning for Sarah. The final notes hung in the air, a promise of a future where Sarah could finally be as loud as she pleased, surrounded by a family of choice, Jed, Samuel, and Martha, in a home where her song would never be silenced again.